So the kind of scientist I was I was doing molecular biology. My undergrad was in genetics. And I basically decided that the thing I liked best about being a scientist is when you get some data and you put it into, well, Excel at the time, didn't have Tableau, not sure it was invented. And then you make some charts and you tell people what it means and you tell people what it doesn't mean and you tell them what you think is going to happen next. And all of the stuff where you pipette things and you mix them around, yeah, that wasn't the best bit. So I now work for SwishKey, which is a company that makes keyboard apps for smartphones. And we were acquired by Microsoft, which is why my talk is going to be entirely based on completely made up data. So here we go. I'm going to tell you about my favorite graph, which is scatter charts for exploring things. And that's a scatter graph, just in case you want to see what one looks like. Now, the reason this is good is when you've got someone that you're working with who, they're not looking for a report, they're not looking for an answer, they just want you to tell them some good stuff. They're like, oh, what's interesting here? And you go, well, do you want me to look at all the things that exist? So you've got one category. The kind of categories that I would have in my regular life are like countries or people using different apps, that kind of thing. And then you've got lots and lots of different bits of numerical data, and you've got maybe a product manager or someone who wants to just poke about and look at stuff. And you're like, okay, here you go, explore. Find something good, and then I will investigate once you find something. So here we go. Step one is you want to make a parameter that has all of the different things that they might be putting on the x-axis. Usefully, you can have the value, which is something short, and the display as, which is something long. The reason you want the value to be something short is that you're about to put it into a calculated field, and you don't want to type out the whole thing. So, I mean, you'll see the slides later because I don't want to dwell on this because this isn't the exciting bit. You do it the same thing again with the y-axis, and then you put them on, and you can have your parameter and then your calculated field on each axis, and then people can, when you publish it, people can use the parameter to change what goes on each axis. That's fun. They can look at all the things and they compare everything to everything else, and they can compare the one thing to itself and go, oh, perfect correlation. And you go, yeah, you put the same thing on both axes. So what's it good for? Whenever I say that, I keep hearing that song in my head, and the answer is not absolutely nothing. It's good for a whole bunch of things. So it's good for correlations. The data I'm using, I got about like 30-something people I know, or random people on Twitter, to fill in a little form where they rated a bunch of things out of 10 or out of 5 or made up a number, including how much you like dogs and how much you like cats. And I was really hoping that I would get a negative correlation saying people who like cats don't like dogs. And I was really hoping this would come up because that would be kind of funny and a good example of a correlation. Turns out it's not true. Most people think cats are great, and some people like dogs. I mean, I think that's fair enough, but there's not much of a correlation there. But if there was a correlation, you'd be able to see it. Next thing it's good for is outliers. It's good to be able to say, oh, look, there's something weird going on there. In my actual job, that might be something like, oh, people in a certain country, their retention's really bad. We need to check out what's going on there. That's the kind of outlier that would be useful in work. Here, I ask people, how many books did you read last year? And how many films did you watch at the cinema? And there's one person who watched 20 films at the cinema, which is twice as many as the next highest people. So that was kind of interesting. Could spot the outlier, draw a circle around it. Third thing it's good for is sort of normal amounts of things. Go, oh, what's a normal amount? When you put something on a graph like this, you can see clusters. Now, I asked, when did Elizabeth I become queen? And I asked, how good do you think you are at history? And I thought, there might be a correlation between people thinking they're good at history and getting the date right. Turns out that there's a strong correlation between The Crown being a very popular Netflix show and everyone thinking I wrote Elizabeth II, because the there's a strong thing here at around 1952. There's also a cluster in the 1550 to 1600 area, probably if you squint a bit. So these are the sort of three things that it's mainly good for. This is my last slide. Other useful tips. I was just plotting individual people on the graph, but normally if you're doing categories like countries or apps or something, you can make the size of the marker bigger if it's a bigger group. Because if you spot an outlier, like a country with very poor retention, but it's really small, you might go, oh, never mind. You can also give people a slider to say, only show me groups of a certain size, because again, there's like 200 countries in the world, they might only want to see the bigger ones. Making good things be bigger. Everyone likes a graph that goes up and to the right. And I think people actually find it much easier to see positive correlations than negative ones. So if you've got certain measures where higher is better, that's good. If you've got certain measures where lower is better, can you maybe do a calculation on it to make it so that going up and to the right, sorry, I'm gesturing that my way around, up and to the right, is the better thing, because people just like that more. And custom shapes are fun. I made people have pick an emoji, and that's the emoji they got. And that's the end.